Welcome to the Tipping Point Show. I'm Jimmy Evans. I'm so glad that you've joined me today, and I have my friend Bill Koenig joining me, and we're going to be talking about the crisis in Israel. We've got a lot of problems in Israel going on right now that are very critical. We're going to be talking about that in depth. Before I begin talking to Bill, I want to remind you of our prophecy conference that's coming up September the 16th, and we've got Rabbi Jonathan Cahn. We have Ed Young, who is the senior pastor of Fellowship Church. That's where we're having the event. Dr. Mark Hitchcock, Billy Crone. We have Tony Evans, who is going to be a special guest for us this year, as well as myself. We're going to have a great day all day long on September 16th. That's a Saturday. That's also during Rosh Hashanah, the Feast of Rosh Hashanah. And you may have heard me teach before that I believe some year that the fulfillment of Rosh Hashanah could be the rapture. And I'm not dogmatic about it. Jesus can come anytime he wants to. But every year at that time, I just kind of start looking forward to maybe this is the year that Jesus is coming back. Now, Rabbi Jonathan Cahn is going to be speaking that day. He's going to be blowing a shofar, of course, him being Jewish, and he's going to be leading us in a special Rosh Hashanah service. It's going to be very, very special. So come and join us in person. Now you can go on endtimes.com. There's a little icon in the left side of the screen, a little world. Click on that. That'll show you on the right-hand side the prophecy conference where you can buy your seat. You can also stream live. And so go on there, come and be with us. Now we already have about 4 sections sold out in the building. So if you want a good seat, go on there right now. We would love to have you join us September 16th. For our prophecy conference. Also remind you of our trip to Israel. When you go on endtimes.com, look at our trip to Israel coming up end of November into, I think it's December the 8th. We're going to go over there. We have a large group going. We would love to have you join us. Look at the Israel trip also when you go on endtimes.com. Today I have Bill Koenig joining me again. Bill's a journalist. He served as a White House correspondent, and he has a new service called Koenig World Watch Daily. His website is constantly updated stories from a large variety of news sources and can be found at watch.org. Bill's passion is the nation of Israel, and he is with me today to talk about what's happening currently in Israel and what it means. Bill, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Jimmy. Appreciate it.
Well, it's really a bad situation in Israel, and I know that people have been watching the things that are happening in the news. You're over there a lot. You're very connected to Israel, and you have your Jerusalem prayer breakfast that you do. I think you do those all over the place.
All over the world.
All over the world. And so just kind of as an overview, what's going on in Israel right now from your perspective?
Well, what is so problematic, very similar to what's happening in the United States. It's amazing how much Israel and the United States track politically, and the division that's taking place in Israel over the judicial reform is at a level never seen before. I've talked last week to an Israeli who's very involved within the country. And he said the tension that he's experiencing is unprecedented. And it's over judicial reform. And unfortunately, the left, the liberals, want the court system that's very independent, calls a lot of the shots. And even there's not the check and balance system in Israel like we have in the United States, executive, legislative, and judicial. And there, they're trying to rein in some of the power that the judges have, even to the extent of selecting their own judges. They want it to be public. So my concern, Jimmy, is the level of tension. They've even talked about a civil war. I don't think it'll get to that, but it is at a level that we haven't probably seen, especially since the modern state of Israel.
I've never, there's always tension in Israel. On some level.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about their government, because I want to be respectful. I love the Jewish people. You and I both wholeheartedly support the Jews in the state of Israel. They have a terrible government. I mean, their form of government is not like anything I've ever heard of before. But when you talk about judicial reform, to the average person who's watching the news, of course, the Biden administration is very much supportive of not having judicial reform, leaving the judiciary the way it is in Israel, status quo. But for the average person to understand what's happening, you see all these riots that are happening. Okay, so you don't have the executive branch of government there the way you have it here, because the prime minister is a part of the Knesset. Okay, it'd be like the president here being a part of the Congress. Okay, so you have the Knesset, but the Knesset right now is under the control of the conservatives. Okay, Benjamin Netanyahu's party, but also Ben Gvir and some very, very right-wing kind of ultra orthodox kind of people. This is what the liberals hate, okay, is the fact that right now you have the conservatives in control. Okay, so then you have the judiciary, but the judiciary is independent of the legislative over here. But let's talk about the reasonableness law. Now, so the judiciary, like the Supreme Court in America, is critical, because if something happens, now we have a constitution, they don't have a constitution. So people need to understand Israel does not have a constitution, so it's just an on-the-fly kind of a commentary on what's legal and what's illegal. So the Knesset passes a law, and the judiciary then has a reasonableness law, which means if they deem it to be unreasonable, they can declare it unlawful.
Amazing.
It's crazy.
Well, and you were mentioning the government there. It's parliamentary.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, any coalition there can be extremely dysfunctional.
Right.
And that's probably an understatement. What happens is the right wing typically has the Orthodox Jews as a very important voting bloc in order to establish a right-wing government. And this government's probably the most right-wing ever.
Yes.
But what was interesting, last year during the election, I was in Israel. I just arrived. And the lady at the car rental place said, this is the most amazing election she's ever experienced because Jewish people, conservatives, were flying in from all over the world.
Wow.
To come to Israel that had Israeli citizenship. And this is a very staunch right-wing government, the most ever. Yeah. And like you mentioned, there are some extremes. Ben Giver and others, they're radical.
Yeah.
So at the same time, the Orthodox Jews for many years have kept from the military service. They've been able to extract, and I think that's a pretty appropriate word, tens of millions of dollars for their educational system. So there's bad blood between the religious and the secular anyhow, the marriage laws and et cetera, et cetera. But in order to operate there, unfortunately, you have to bring people into your political party that you just don't see eye to eye
right.
With.
Yeah.
And so consequently, it's dysfunctional. I mean, we've had, 4 or 5 elections in the last 2.5 years?
And if any small little coalition or little group drops out of the coalition right now, they have to go back to another election.
Well, exactly. And the last government that was in place, led by Bennett and Lapid, was basically, it was an anti-Bibi coalition.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was the most dysfunctional government Israel's ever had. It was surprised it lasted over a couple weeks.
Yeah.
But the people in that government hung in there for about 9-10 months because they'll never be in another government like they were.
Yeah.
So consequently, but it was an anti-Bibi government. So Netanyahu's back in power, and he says, hey, we're tired of the judicial having the kind of influence, intimidating legislators, intimidating members of the Knesset. We need more balance. And unfortunately, it's led to a division between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem more so than any time at any time in history since Israel was created 75 years ago. One other thing, Jimmy, is the liberal Jewish business people from around the world are pumping tremendous amount of money into this public relations fiasco, very similar. There's a lot of the similar technique to the Black Lives Matter movement here in the United States. Same technique. So only God knows how it's going to play out, but Netanyahu says we're not going to have a civil war and we're going to continue to govern and legislate because we're in the majority.
Well, and I want us to get into a conversation here in just a little bit about Gog-Magog, about Iran, because they're vulnerable. This is as vulnerable as they've been in a long, long time, maybe ever, since the beginning of the nation. So the reservist, I have an article right here from the Jerusalem Post, another 10,000 Israeli Defense Force reservists announced they won't serve anymore. So now you have the military fracturing on Netanyahu, and this is a serious situation. You've got Iran on the northern border of Israel. You have Russia on the northern border of Israel. You have Hezbollah. Hezbollah has been very feisty lately. You have, of course, Hamas always there, Islamic Jihad, all the different components, Iran being the power broker in that area. You have all that going on. It's hot. It's a hot situation, and Israel's in crisis. And I just believe any day there could be something happening. Now, again, I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. So the judiciary, I think there's 15 members of the Supreme Court of Israel. I believe that's correct.
I think that's correct, too.
A block of 3 judges can block any new judge coming in. Okay, so it's real dysfunctional. The way they select their judges is more complicated than I can understand. But if any 3 Supreme Court justices blackball a new justice coming in, they can't come in. So one of the things, you have the reasonableness law is part of the issue. And now they've struck that down. Okay, the Knesset voted, they struck, you have, again, the riots and all the tension over there. But now the Supreme Court is reviewing the lawfulness of them striking that down. This is how dysfunctional it
is. Exactly.
So when I went to Israel for the first time, and for people who have never been over there, you're going to the Holy Land and you expect holy people, but they're not holy people. Some of them are, and they're all precious. But Israel's a very secular nation. And Tel Aviv is, someone told me when I was over there back in December, that Tel Aviv is the LGBT capital of the world. Very, very staunch LGBT. So for people to understand the volatility of this issue, you have the ultra right-wing, ultra-Orthodox Jews. And they basically, just like Sharia law in Iran or in Saudi Arabia or something, they want Jewish law. They want Jerusalem basically to take over the country and for the Orthodox kind of belief system. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So this is what they're, and again, some of the very right-wing people in the Knesset, they want to rebuild the temple. They want to go have sacrifices, or which I want, I want for that to happen. But they want all this stuff. Well, then you have this, most of the secular society, most of Israel's secular, and you have the secular society and all the LGBT people, and this is what they're afraid of. They're afraid of the judiciary weakening and the conservatives strengthening, and them being under the thumb of the conservatives. Now, this is just like when the Supreme Court struck down the abortion law, Roe versus Wade in America. And you see the Supreme Court do that, and then you see the liberals go crazy and talk about stacking the Supreme Court and all that kind of stuff. It's exactly the same thing.
Absolutely.
It's not going to change. I don't believe that the political structure of Israel is going to change significantly. I do believe that there is going to be a crisis around the time of the return of Jesus. I had Rick Renner on the show, and Rick is a Greek expert. We were talking about the word rapture, and he said, unfortunately, the word rapture means to rescue in the nick of time. It means like right before it gets, So I think that when the rapture happens, it's going to be a lot like it is right now, a world in crisis. Jesus said that there will be distress of nations with perplexity, and perplexity means there's just no answers. There are no answers for America. I mean, Jesus, there's revival's the answer. But in Israel right now, it's perplexing. They just don't know what to do. So you have the situation now with that. So let's talk about Gog-Magog for just a minute. Now, Jeremiah 49 talks about Elam. And our friend Bill Salas has been on the show, and we've talked about it. Now, Elam is the southern part of Iran. And it's where they have a lot of their nuclear installations. Now, and by the way, because I've shown this on the show, I've shown a map. If Israel bombed Iran, that would be the most convenient area for them to bomb.
That's right.
As far as strategically. So we were talking about wag the dog. There have been presidents of the United States in serious situations, and to distract from their domestic distress, they start a war, or they do something over here. I've heard, and this was in the Jerusalem Post, someone comment that this would be a convenient time for Netanyahu to bomb Iran.
Yeah, I think that's speculation, but like we talked about, Jimmy, I mean, that's exactly what Bill Clinton did with the Lewinsky scandal and his desire for atonement. Yeah, he got in the middle of that wag the dog Kosovo war. I think that's always a possibility, and Israel's gift is preemptive. Right. In other words, not knowing when they're going to do something. So in some ways, it could be advantageous to Israel if they're near that red line to go ahead and make a move against Iran for their own protection. As we talked about too, Jimmy, the Persians are master at strategy. Right. They're very patient. They're master chess players. I've met Iranian in D.C. and their negotiators get PhDs in negotiations.
Wow.
Another Jewish friend at the embassy in Washington, D.C. says, you can't out-negotiate these guys. He said, they'll agree to a deal that has less teeth than the deal they just previously agreed to.
Yeah.
Or the other strategy is agree to everything and then at the last minute change.
Yeah.
They drive you wild. They drive you nuts.
Well, they've been doing this for decades.
Forever.
Yeah.
And they're so effective at it.
Yeah.
And I think with that said, the Persians have been hit hard inside of Iran, inside of Syria, Lebanon, and they still haven't done anything. So the Arabs have a tendency to get worked up and go to war too early,
right,
where the Persians are completely opposite. They're very calculated. So as gifted as Israel's defense and security is, and that's part of the reason
right,
they're talking to the United States about normalcy with Israel right now, because they're concerned about Iran, even though they have relations now or are talking now. It's the playing field of Gog-Magog, 38, 39, and Ezekiel, and also Jeremiah 49 is playing out right before our eyes. For guys like us, this is an exciting time.
Yeah.
It's serious, it's ominous, but boy, the pieces are falling into place. And at some point, the Prime Minister of Israel is going to have to make a difficult decision, along with the defense. When you start talking about reservists and others not willing to participate because of judicial reform, that's a very precarious, dangerous time for a country that needs to be war ready and not a division within their defense industry.
Well, they had a military exercise last year, I think it's called Chariots of Fire, was all of their military branches practicing bombing Iran. And by the way, America was a part of that. They put 5 billion shekels in their budget, I think it was last year, maybe this year, to bomb Iran. And then to respond to when all the proxies of Iran go crazy after they get bombed. And so the Jeremiah 49, the Elam, and this is my opinion, but what I believe is going to happen at some point, Ezekiel 38, God says, I'm going to put a hook in your jaw. And in other words, this is going to be my decision, not your decision.
Amen.
I'm going to provoke you into doing what you're going to do. It's going to be on my timetable. So the hook in the jaw was an animal hook. And so when you had a stubborn animal that wouldn't do what you wanted to do, you put a hook in its jaw and you drug it around like a donkey. Well, that's what this is. So God says, I'm going to put a hook in your jaw. Well, if Israel bombed Iran, it would be the most provocative thing they could possibly do. First of all, Russia has been warning America and Israel for years, if you bomb Iran, you've got us to account to. Now, there are Russian scientists all through the Iranian nuclear installations. So there can be some Russians die if they bomb Iran. So Jeremiah 49, Elam, and it says in Jeremiah 49, it'll never be inhabited again. And the dispersed of that area will go to every area of the world. Well, that's a major nuclear event. Either an accident that happens, could be, but it says, I'm going to knock the bow out of your hand. And in other words, it's a judgment against the leaders of Iran.
That's right.
So this is going to happen. Okay, so they practiced for bombing Iran. Then they practiced for defending their borders once it was over with. That's exactly what's going to happen. Hezbollah, Hamas, all of them, they're going to go crazy. So Syria, Russia. So you have the Psalm 83 war that Bill Salas talks about, which is a regional war where the Israelis are attacked by their regional neighbors, including Jordan, and there's a supernatural victory that happens in that. Then you have the Gog-Magog war, Ezekiel 30 and 39, which is a broader regional war where you have Russia, Iran, Turkey, all the different nations that come in. This is my opinion. I think that's the order. I think it begins with Jeremiah 49. That's the hook in the jaw. I believe immediately you have the regional conflict of Psalm 83, followed by the Ezekiel 38 and 39. It could happen in a matter of 2 to 3 days, the order of those. But there's going to be conflict. So the beautiful thing about prophecy is we know the end of the story. Now your book, and I always talk about Bill's book, Eye to Eye, and this is Facing the Consequences of Dividing Israel. This is a wonderful book. Well, Bill documents, being a journalist, documents 124 different times?
About 126 in the book, and the rest are on their website. Yeah.
When we have pressured Israel to give up land and a natural disaster or some disaster that's hit America. Okay, so this is documented here. And so Israel, we know the end of the story, and the end of the story is the world is going to march against Israel. Okay, Armageddon. Zechariah 12 through 14 tells us the whole world is going to march against them. And Jerusalem becomes this unbelievably divisive issue, difficult issue. That
burdensome stone, yeah.
And you can check all those boxes. You're there. So we know the end of this story. The amazing thing, Bill, is everything that's been happening decade after decade is moving us closer to that point. And I don't know how close we are. I never set dates. That's futile, because this judicial reform issue could go away next week. I don't see how it's going to, but it could. Okay. But what I see happening in Israel is the conglomeration of crises from around them internally. America's putting pressure on them to revert back to the pre-1967 boundaries, to have a two-state solution with the Palestinians. All these things are happening. All it would take would be just a tiny little provocation to create war between the Arab world, the Iranians, the Russians, and Israel. And so it could happen. I mean, so believing, and I believe that some year Jesus could return at Rosh Hashanah. And what I've always looked at every year is what's happening in Israel around this period of time.
So true.
And so in the next couple of months, you see something brewing that it could be 10 years from now or longer, but it could be that this year we're going to see something blow up here pretty quick in Israel.
Well, the key is the trigger, and like you said, the hook. Mm-hmm. God's going to initiate it through the trigger. And Iran is putting a lot of money in Islamic Jihad that are based in Gaza. They support Syria, Hezbollah. They're deploying rockets in Iran that can hit Israel, Iraq, Yemen, Syria, and Lebanon. And, Israel's going, these are serious missiles. These aren't the rockets that have they can't go very far. The 150,000 that Hezbollah has. I think they're up to 15,000 missiles, which have a lot further distance inside of Syria and Lebanon right now. And that has Israel concerned. Israel's plan will devastate whatever area of Iran. It'll be EMP, it'll be hydrogen, it'll be nuclear missiles fired from their subs in the Persian Gulf. They also have other weapons that no one seems to know. They have bunker-busting bombs that we give them that are improved dramatically. Oh, yeah. They have, 2 squadrons of F-35s, about to have 3 over the next couple of years, up to, I think that'll put them just under 30 F-35s, which is an incredible plane. And so I think, Jimmy, it is aligning quickly. And again, us watchmen, we love watching that dialogue between Israel and Iran, because that's pretty much the time clock. Jerusalem's a time clock, Israel's a time clock, but every major leader in the world right now thinks Jerusalem needs to be divided. The Biden administration right now, the day they're talking about normalization of relations, we have 90 to 100 mile an hour winds just going through Washington, D.C. at the very time. It fits the pattern. I remember the massive storm that hit when Ehud Olmert was at the White House. Massive. We were sitting there in the White House press room watching this storm just roll in. And just as Olmert's about to leave, this massive storm hits the White House. And here they're talking about Israel-Saudi normalization relations, and the Mossad leaders in Washington, and they're pushing to do something, and we have these record-setting winds slamming into Washington. You could just feel that collective fury or fire of the God of Israel when they talk about their land or his land and his people being put at risk. So we're something, I don't know, in Rosh Hashanah, we all are excited about Rosh Hashanah. We don't know the day or the hour, but that festival, that Jewish feast, creates great excitement for all of us.
Yeah, it really does. And we're 6 weeks away, and I hope this is the year, And I mean, I'm tired of this place. I'm ready to go be. As long as we're here, we're going to keep doing what we're doing. Yeah. But it's just, the world is just in the most severe situation I've ever seen. And so let's talk for just a minute. There's other issues that are in the news right now. The West Bank settlements, we drove through the West Bank last December. We were in Galilee, and we just drove through the West Bank all the way up to Jerusalem. And I was shocked how many Jewish settlements have been built in the West Bank. And they're trying to build more. And of course, there's international pressure on them not to build those settlements. Now, you always, and that, because of you now, every time I see something like that, I'm looking for some kind of a natural disaster.
It just happens.
Yeah, so the Biden administration, the world is now putting pressure on them. Now, Saudi Arabia wants to normalize relations, or there's talks about normalizing Saudi relations with Israel, which puts Netanyahu in a very difficult position, because the Saudis want concessions to the Palestinians.
Such as a moratorium on any extension of sovereignty to Jewish communities of between 3 and 4 years. And that just won't work in that coalition. But they think they can push that through, Jimmy. And that's what's important for the normalization. And the king and the crown prince, especially the king of Saudi Arabia, has said no normalization with Israel unless there is a Palestinian state. But Saudi Arabia's, despite their ongoing relations with China and Iran and their recent negotiations and talks and normalcy, they still remain very concerned. And part of the normalization talks is the United States guaranteeing security for the Saudis as one of the caveats of normalization relationships with Israel.
Yeah. In Ezekiel 38, it says that Sheba, Dedan, and the young lions of Tarshish, and Tarshish and her young lions, when the Gog-Magog coalition begins to invade Israel, that they're confronted by Sheba, Dedan. That's Saudi Arabia. That's the Arabian Peninsula. And so it's interesting that Bible prophecy 2,500 years ago tells us geopolitically that, and Dr. Mark Hitchcock believes that Tarshish is England, Britain, and the young lions, of course, would be America. But isn't it interesting that right now that Saudi Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula, the England, Britain, and America were aligned with Israel, more aligned with Israel.
Absolutely.
Than we are with Russia and all that. And so everything's lining up. One more thing, the International Criminal Court is trying to adjudicate the Israeli-Palestinian issue. Now, at some point, this is going to go international. We know that. Because of Zechariah 12, because we know the whole world's going to march against Jerusalem. We know the end of the story. Okay, and so the Israelis have written a brief to the International Criminal Court, which I wish they wouldn't, because they're recognizing it
exactly
when they do that.
Totally agree.
And so they've written a brief to them, and they're saying you're not in a position to adjudicate this issue between us and the Palestinians. And of course, the International Criminal Court is saying we have authority over anybody. Now, the International Criminal Court, from my understanding of it, they cannot prosecute a nation. They can just prosecute the leader of a nation. And if he leaves there, they can arrest him or whatever like that. So they basically would be prosecuting Netanyahu and saying, we want to adjudicate this. And Israel says, no, you can't. And they said, no, we just did. And what we're saying is you have to give up. Go back to the pre-1967 boundaries, give up East Jerusalem, all this other stuff, and recognize their sovereignty over whatever it would be they recognize their sovereignty over. Israel's not going to do it. We know they're not going to do it. And then the United Nations, which has always been anti-Israel, or has been for many years, anti-Israel, they're going to try to militarily enforce a two-state solution. That's going to happen.
You know, it's very problematic, Jimmy, because when you look at one thing, the Trump administration told the International Criminal Court, just leave Israel alone. And if you don't leave them alone, we're not going to let any of your people come into the United States. And we'll also defend Israel at the International Criminal Court. So in other words, the Biden administration is doing a lot of things right now that are very problematic.
Yeah.
Very problematic, and there's going to be the big squeeze. You're talking about the EU representative for the Middle East says, don't call Area C part of Israel. It's Palestine. A, B, and C is Palestine.
Right.
And also the pressure that's being applied on Israel in the judicial reform by the Biden administration.
Yeah.
There's going to be negotiations, normally, as we discussed, on normalization through the Abraham Accords with Saudi Arabia. Right. And there's going to be some peace events here in the next month or two after the recesses on the land of Israel. So a lot of stuff's coming to a head in the biblical, the prophetic, and the supernatural all at the same time. It's going to be an interesting convergence of these issues going forward.
It really will be. Let's talk about Russia for just a second. So Russia obviously is a power player in the Middle East. They've got relations with all the Gog-Magog people, big alliance between them and Iran. What do you see? Ukraine is an embarrassment to Russia, to say the least. And one of the things, and I've heard this for years, that Russia really is a regional power. They're not really the superpower they are thought to be. Even what makes them a superpower are their nuclear weapons.
Absolutely.
Is they're pre-Soviet, nuclear weapons. But you're seeing the Ukraine kick their tail. The Ukraine is now sending, drones into Russia.
into Moscow.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
So it's an embarrassment, to say the least. So it says that, the Ezekiel 38 is written to Gog, who's a man, who's the leader of, the Gog-Magog, all those nations. I don't, and I don't know that Putin is Gog, okay, because he could go and somebody worse could come in. And they're warning about that to some degree. But he certainly is a maniac. And he certainly is desirous of 31 trillion cubic feet of natural gas off the coast of Israel.
That he doesn't want to see going to Europe, that's going to affect his competitive pricing of gas to Europe.
So he has a vested interest.
Absolutely.
And the incredible thing about that is, 20 years ago, that didn't exist.
I know it.
And you'd read Ezekiel 38 and say, you're coming for plunder? What are you going to get?
Absolutely.
Well, they're going to get all that natural gas, which is very important to them, especially after the Nord Stream pipeline blew up and all that stuff. Bill, thank you. It's always a delight to have you here. You're so knowledgeable about Israel. I want you to come back again, and we're going to continue to talk about that. But I hope for all of our viewers that this has helped you to kind of digest and understand more in depth the things that are happening in Israel. We will continue to update you, Bill. God bless you.
Thank you, Jimmy. God bless you.
Bye-bye.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us today on the Tipping Point Show. I'll be back again next week with another show. Thank you for being a subscriber. If you're a subscriber to Tipping Point, thank you so much. We'll see you again next week. God bless you. Goodbye.